like to call upon our second speaker, who will be talking about some of the classical training that students of knowledge go through about the Dars-i-Nizami. I'd like to call upon Iram Bostan, who is currently on her Master's by Research programme. She was awarded a first class in Islamic Studies here at the University of Leeds and is now undertaking the Dars-i-Nizami studies in Yorkshire. So without further ado, I'd like to call upon Iram to deliver her.
Assalamu alaikum. Hello and thank you all for being here. I'd just like to start off by saying thank you to Dr. Islam for such an insightful talk. Now, I'd like to begin by being completely honest regarding my contribution today. When Dr. Islam first invited me to speak about my journey through religious studies, I was very hesitant to accept. Now, there are a number of reasons for this. Firstly, being the introverted academic that I am, well, let's just say none of us particularly like public speaking. Secondly, and more importantly, I was being asked to discuss one of the most highly contested, volatile and political issues in the contemporary world. That is, my talk would undoubtedly traverse the treacherous terrain that is the status of women in Islam. And this fed into my dilemma when it came to attributing an appellation to my talk. How could I put into words such a complex journey without falling into cliches and platitudes, as is often the case with these types of discussions? After much deliberation, I came to the title Reclaiming Our Tradition. Because as someone who views themselves as a feminist, that is someone who believes in the equality of men and women, and someone who equally considers themselves a devout believer, that is someone who has devoted their life in the pursuit of religious knowledge, I felt the need to emphasize the fact that we, as women, equally have contributed to and equally have a claim upon the religious heritage of Islam. From the mother of the believers, Aisha radiallahu anha, to the great Sufi saint Rabia al-Adawiyya, to the founder of the oldest institution of higher learning, Fatima al-Fihri, Muslim women have played important roles in the interpretation and the preservation of religious knowledge throughout history. Something that is not always highlighted and emphasized enough in my opinion. Thankfully, the terms Shaykha or Alima in the modern day are very much becoming normalized in not only reformist platforms but also traditionalist networks. We know that Allah exhorts the believers to supplicate, وَقُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي إِلْمًا, Lord, increase my knowledge. To be able to converse fluently regarding the knowledge of Islam, one must firstly learn the language of Islam. And when I say this, I don't simply mean Urdu, Arabic, Farsi or Turkish. No. What I'm actually referring to is the legal, theological and philosophical heritage that has been preserved for over a millennium and throughout the history of the Islamic world, and it continues to be taught across the Muslim world today. I am, of course, referring to the Dars-i-Nizami. For me, as a Muslim woman, studying the Dars-i-Nizami has been an empowering experience. Not only is one able to access the rules and the regulations that are lived by countless Muslims across the world, but one is also able to discern why these rules came to be and through what frameworks they were actually developed. Equally, one also becomes privy to numerous nuanced and fascinating discussions and debates that would otherwise remain inaccessible. For example, not many people know about the debate amongst medieval scholars regarding God sending female prophets. So the fact that Mary, mother of Jesus, and Sarah, the wife of Abraham, may God's peace and blessings be upon them all, were prophets of God, was a common held view within certain spheres of Islamic scholarship. As a feminist, I accept that there are views and ideas and rulings that I can often come across that are worrying and deleterious. We already know most of fiqh, Islamic legal theory, pertains to women's issues, from the banal hayd and nifas to the more complicated such as testimonies, divorce and inheritance. The fact that there are edicts that state that women's testimony should not be accepted due to a lack of women's intellect is worrying, as well as edicts that state that the women should return to their husbands even if they are physically abused. Upon accessing this knowledge within our texts, theoretical and subjective knowledge male scholars have of women becomes all too apparent. In the basic rites of passage, birth, marriage, divorce, attacks on selfhood, death, the custodians of these institutions are predominantly men. Muslim women need to access these traditions and be able to interpret and have input regarding these matters. This was readily accepted by some of the great scholars of the past. The great Imam Shafi said, Al-ibratu bi'adat an-nisa. The conclusion in feminine matters is down to women's custom. In other words, regarding the issues of women, women know best. Perhaps we can define this as feminine urf, which not only is a legal maxim in and of itself, but in essence all of what can be termed fiqh an-nisa. But I don't simply want to overgeneralize. Engaging with our tradition equally, it critically also presents us with the ability to highlight aspects of the tradition that sought to protect and empower women, aspects that should be emphasized and highlighted. For example, I must share with you all a gem I came across when sifting through a classical legal text only the other day. The edict is found in the Hanafi legal manual of Ghazi Khan, in which a discussion ensues regarding a woman who has been divorced by her husband, but the husband refuses to accept the divorce has taken place. It reads, a woman knows with certainty that her husband has divorced her thrice, yet the husband denies having divorced her. As the wife is helpless in preventing the husband from having access to her, it is permissible for her to kill her husband. However, it is proper that she should kill him with drugs rather than with an instrument of death in case she is charged with his murder. Now, women killing their husbands with an overdose of opium, for example, is not probably something that jumps into mind when people mention God's sacred law. So, if by now we have established that studying the Dars-i-Nizami is important, yet we recognise it has its shortcomings on gender-related issues, how exactly do we proceed? It is a difficult question and one that continues to be challenging for those in the field. With the rise of Islamophobic literature using the subjugation of Muslim women as a justification for anti-Muslim sentiment, and the historical use of this trope during the colonial period, one must be ever cautious of falling into the Orientalist gaze regarding the oppressed Muslim woman. Equally, however, Muslim women who study the Islamic legal tradition often find certain rulings that clearly espouse unequal gender norms. How to navigate these pitfalls is an issue that is widely debated, and a number of contemporary approaches are currently being developed in order to deal with these issues at hand. The meteoric rise of Islamic feminist groups and what has been dubbed Muslim theology is one example of such. Another can be seen with our very own Professor Said and his critical Muslim studies, and also the fantastic work being done by Dr. Sheikh and Dr. Islam here at the Iqbal Centre serve as another case in point. As God states in the Quran, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَمَعَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. And those who strive for God, we will surely guide them to our ways, and indeed Allah is with the doers of good. We must all continue to struggle for God, fighting for truth, justice and integrity in all that we do. We are today celebrating a man who dedicated his life to doing just that, Mufti Amimul Ihsan Sahib. He reached the heights by studying the classical tradition and modifying it. We, as Muslim women, should learn from his example and equally study our tradition and equally rectify and modify aspects that we understand to be outside of the Sharia. In the internal words of Ibn al-Qayyim, the Sharia is based upon justice. Every matter which abandons justice is not part of the Sharia. By studying our tradition and empowering ourselves, we must reclaim the principles that this tradition was based upon. Muslim women must courageously step forth and be proud of our heritage, and at the same time keep an ever-critical eye, as our mothers before us did. We must walk in the footsteps of Aisha, Amra bint Abdul Rahman, Rabi al-Basri, Salama, Fatima al-Fikri, and so many others. Today, Mufti Sahib is being honoured by his granddaughter, Sayyidah Umayma, and his disciples, of which I hope includes me. The tradition is ours. We should take ownership of it, and we will find honest, informed, critical, and creative ways of reconnecting to the chain, silsila, which goes back to our master and beloved Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Thank you for listening.